When your family breaks up, when you're ripped off, let down, when you get sick or when someone dies, when we see or go through suffering like that, something within us tells us it's not fair. Deep down, all of us have this sense of how life should be. Now and again, when everything is going our way, when everything is fair and good, we feel the world's all as it should be. But when the dark clouds of suffering appear, a little voice rises inside us and we hear ourselves crying out, why? Why this? Why now? Why me? So why does life often seem so unfair? In the Bible, God tells us why. Life no longer works the way He meant it to. That's why the headlines are so full of wars, famines, all sorts of tragedies and disasters. And that's why, closer to home, we look out on the sidelines and see suffering in others. Or why sometimes we get caught up in the front lines of our own suffering. It feels awful, doesn't it? Back in the beginning, when God made the world, it was all the way it was meant to be. Today, when life goes well for us, we still get a sense of what that was like. And we wish it could be like that all the time. But it isn't. Because something happened to spoil God's perfect world. It came like a terrible interruption, and it all started with one little act of selfishness. God had created a perfect world and invited people to go and enjoy it, saying just one thing: trust me. God had been so good to the first man and woman. He'd given them everything, but they still wanted a little bit more for themselves. When offered the chance not just to be loved by God, but to be like God, they went for it. They no longer trusted God's instruction. They decided to do things their own way, and it was a total disaster. It all fell apart. At that moment, pain, sorrow, darkness, death spilled into God's perfect world. And it's been like that ever since, for all of us, in everything. So is that it then? The world is broken, and so are our lives. Here we are again asking why, but this time asking, why doesn't God do something? Has God just left us to it? Turned a deaf ear to our suffering and our pain? Well, no. God has taken the most amazing step to put things right again. Having seen the tragic headlines of brokenness, God stepped out from the sidelines, came down onto the front line when He came into the world in Jesus, His Son. Jesus knew what it was to live on the wrong side of what's fair. Born into a poor family, put out of his home, criticised at every turn, mocked, threatened, turned upon by his own people, wrongly convicted, finally hung on a cross to die a terrible death, even though he'd never done anything wrong. But Jesus also rose above the worst that suffering could throw at him when He came back from the dead. And He did that not just for Himself, but for us. In fact, for the whole world. When He returns again, He promises that everything will be put right, set fair. So when we feel it's not fair, or ask, why doesn't God do something? It's not what we think. God has done something. He isn't sitting in the sky reading the headlines, or helplessly watching from the sidelines. He has joined us on the front line of our suffering, and we can find Him there with us if we take another look.